Welcome to this week's episode of The Inspired Evolution. We are not messing about in this one. This one goes super deep. Daniel Pinchbeck, an amazing author and a thinker, invites us to think about what life after capitalism really could look like. And he talks about potentially capitalism as a model, as a structure, may just be a transitionatory structure, starting to look at how much competition it is fueled by and how it's not innate to the human principles of coexistence, and how much the need for us transcending competition for cooperation is required at this particular time, and potentially how so many of the challenges that we're currently facing as a human species, whether it's the climate or the environment or our financial models breaking down, a lot of these things which were previously our sources of power now crumbling. He potentially talks about how that is a necessary collective evolutionary rite of passage that the world as a whole may potentially be going on, and how it's important to reconnect to our personal rites of passages and our personal evolutions in order to facilitate that. This is a deep conversation, massive call to responsibility. What does it really mean to go global? There's an exciting episode to really take the lid off your thinking in terms of what is possible for us as a species, as a collective, and what may be required for us to roll up our sleeves to facilitate a truly inspired evolution. Tune in, enjoy this episode, guys. And at that moment when inspiration hits you and you're ready to evolve, please do us a solid. Give this video a thumbs up. And if you're new to the Inspired Evolution, please do subscribe. It's an honor to be walking this path by your side. Aside from my soul. Welcome to the Inspired Evolution, and it is a treat to be here today. We've got with us Daniel Pinchbeck. Daniel, how are you, brother?
I'm good. That was quite a yelp.
If you haven't had your morning coffee, you have now, I guess. For those tuning in to Daniel for the first time, he is an author and a thinker. His books famously include Breaking Open the Head, The Return of Quetzalcoatl, Notes from the Edge of Time, and How Soon Is Now. His new book is dedicated to When Plants Dream. He hosted a talk show, Mindshift, on Gaia TV. He's the co-founder of the web magazine Reality Sandwich and Evolver.net. He was featured in his 2010 documentary, 2012, A Time for Change. Your work has been dedicated to transformation on a planetary level. It is such a pleasure to have you here, Daniel. Thank you so much for doing this with us here today.
No, thanks for chatting.
So I wanted to tune in straight out of the gate. I know that this is going to be a deep conversation. We're probably not going to fluff around at the surface for a long time. So let's just go there. Rites of passages, what are they? Why are they so important? And where did they go? So there's many questions in there, but let's start with, what are they?
Okay, sure. I mean, around the world, you have, indigenous cultures, and generally, particularly for men, but often for women also, there's a period in young male adulthood or adolescence where they kind of separate off from the community and they go through a set of experiences that can be very arduous. They can include like fastings and walkabouts and eating bunches of peyote or ayahuasca or whatever. And then so they go through kind of an initiation process. And they have visions, and then they tell the kind of elders of the tribe, of the community, what their visions are, and those visions are kind of honored. They're welcomed back into the community, and in a lot of cultures, as I said, particularly for men, it's not really thought that you can be like a fully adult person until you've gone through some type of initiation.
And what's the thinking behind that? Why are you not a fully adult person until you've had a rite of passage? Does that bleed into why are they so important? Why are these rite of passages so important for us to be identified as fully functioning adults within a society?
Well, I think if we look around, modern culture, which doesn't have that type of initiation, we really see the difference. I mean, I think the idea was that you needed to get out of your ego to have a understanding, like a lived direct experience of transpersonal consciousness, so that you weren't so addicted and hooked on your ego. You kind of would recognize, and some people like Joseph Chilton Pearce argues that this might have actually almost had like a neurological function, that it's like a neurological reset or something. But yeah, I think we see in our society, because we don't have we don't have anything like a shamanic practice or whatever, but people get, particularly men, tend to get trapped in their ego, and then they seek sort of limited egoic rewards, and those they kind of like take over, like whether it's wealth or power or manipulation or whatever.
Yeah, it's interesting because reading your books, it's sort of from this simple ceremonial loss, let's just call it that. We've drawn some parallels that actually that bleeds into some of the I don't want to say wrought, but capitalism gone mad, or materialism gone mad, I would say. And yeah, it's left unchecked, these egos. We kind of, I feel like that's sort of an argument for the hedonism that sort of follows materialism, that runs rampant that we see present in today's world. Is that a safe parallel that I've drawn, or do you feel the same way? Or yeah, cool. So why did we lose these rites of passages, in your opinion? Like what happened there? Where did they go if they were so fundamental to our development as going from being a child to an adult, and running the risk of having the world run by our children?
Yeah, I mean, that's something I've looked at a lot, and a lot of other authors have also kind of thought about. But I mean, it seems like something happened kind of with Christianity, maybe before, but there was a kind of a shift from, I mean, people talk about, Gnosticism as like a heretical sect of Christianity, but actually it seems more likely that the Gnostics were people who had a connection to like these older, like pagan mystery school traditions, like the Eleusinian mysteries were probably a place where everybody from the classical world would go and drink like a psychedelic drink called the kykeon, and they'd sort of be, collectively they would go through this kind of transpersonal consciousness experience. But the problem is that type of society is more sort of horizontal, because the idea is that everybody seeks divine knowledge, inspiration for themselves. So we, as the priests became powerful, and sort of Rome and the church kind of merged, the sort of ruling class sort of decided that they would move from initiation to indoctrination. So instead of giving everybody the tools to become self-realized to some extent, the idea was that sacred knowledge was then held only by a small, elite class of priests. I mean, they were the only ones who could even read the Bible eventually in Latin, and everybody else was just supposed to have faith. Like you were supposed to believe that if you believed in, Jesus's divinity, that meant that you were saved. Whereas actually, I mean, one very interesting book around this topic is Not in His Image by John Lash, about Gnosticism. But yeah, so if you look at the Gnostic Gospels, which were actually, it seems like they were Gospels that were just as original as the ones that ended up in the Bible about Jesus, but they got chopped because they didn't fit the new paradigm that the church was trying to establish. So Jesus says, like, open the doors for yourself so you'll know what is. So it's a much more Gnostic idea. Jesus was actually not telling everyone to just believe in his divinity, but he was saying you were all the sons of the Father. By opening the door for yourselves, you can have the same type of consciousness. And yes, that's kind of it. I mean, another whole question, there's people who believe that there was actually a psychedelic mushroom cult at the origin of Christianity. Like John Allegro was a Princeton art historian, wrote a book called The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross. And he found a lot of early Christian iconography that sort of hides mushrooms in it, as if they were talking to initiates, saying this is actually the sacrament, not just the wafer.
Yeah, right. So at the heart of most rites of passages are these psychedelic experiences, or is it just or is it? Yeah, go on.
We can't say it, but there are definitely cultures that have a similar type of construct without them. So like the Eskimos, the North American, indigenous in the North, didn't really have access to these types of psychedelic plants.
Hmm.
Then you have like Australian Aboriginals, although now it seems we're learning that maybe they used acacia, which when it's burned releases DMT, so they may have some access to it. But there are many cultures around the world which didn't have it, and also maybe didn't need it because they
Hmm.
had other ways of getting connected. I mean, I was very privileged to host a couple of kind of retreats with people from the Kogi and the Arawak tribes, cultures in Colombia. And they actually, the men use coca leaves as their sacrament, which isn't so psychedelic, but they believe that used properly, it helps you to actually connect with your truth.
Right. And is there a bit of a renaissance around such tools, around rites of passages in the world right now, do you believe? And if so, why now?
Yeah, I mean, it's there's a explosion of interest in psychedelics happening. I mean, it's interesting for me because when I wrote my first book, which came out in 2002, which kind of predated the new psychedelic movement, was called Breaking Open the Head.
Mm.
And when that book came out, I mean, in the book, I was like, wow, I think we really need to, more people need to take these. I mean, basically, psychedelics crescendoed in the 60s. Late 60s, they started to be outlawed and repressed. The governments of the US and elsewhere began to connect them with other movements of liberation, the Green Movement, and so on, and saw them as a danger, as a threat to society. So they were totally repressed for like, I don't know, 35 years, to the point where there was like even no scientific studies done with people. And if you look back in the 60s, which I wrote about in Breaking Open the Head, these substances were considered by like, the top psychologists, psychiatrists to be the most amazing things that they just ever discovered, that they allowed us new access to understanding all these different dimensions of the human psyche that we didn't know about.
Mm-hmm.
And so that whole thing was just closed down until the last 15 years-ish. And I think that my book was one of the books, because it came out from Random House, it got reviewed in the Times, and sold a certain number of copies, that helped to begin to kind of shift the mainstream consciousness around these things. And there were other books and other movies. Then the whole thing just started to snowball, and now it's explosive. I mean, there are people. There's like 400 companies now that are getting ready to do psychedelic therapy. Ketamine's been legalized. Different psychedelics are getting decriminalized in different states and counties.
What do
And
you
the
think?
demand for it is gigantic.
Sorry to interrupt you. My apologies.
No worries.
So what do you think is actually like the state of the world, or the collective evolution that we're kind of going through, that it's calling in this renaissance? If we can dig that deep, almost like energetically, like what do you think is going on that's calling in a state of revival for rites of passages as such as the ones you're describing?
Well, I mean, I think in some ways it's just a inevitable, natural kind of evolutionary process.
Right.
Because, as I said, I'm describing this development. We had like, Christianity repressed a visionary experience and demonized, like, when they did the Inquisition, like the 15th, 16th century, they went after people who either used native plants in Europe or who naturally possessed the ability to like vision other dimensions or reach these other states of consciousness. So that, then we had the scientific, industrial revolution, the scientific revolution, and the whole focus of Western society for hundreds of years was on, left brain, rationalism, materialism, science, technology, and industry. And then finally, starting in the 40s, with the discovery of LSD, and then the rediscovery of psilocybin and peyote and ayahuasca, then this kind of opened these doors in the Western rational worldview. And then that was too much at that time, so it got suppressed, it was pushed underground, with different, times when it would sort of come up in the rave culture in the 90s or whatever. But now, like, a whole generation has matured, like the generation that began with those substances in the 60s, like who were teenagers back then, are now the baby boomers who are, running, society and running medical colleges and so on. So it's time for our society to kind of be able to reintegrate these things and really try to understand what their value is and what they can do.
Awesome. And so one of the things I hear in your books a lot is, I I guess the trajectory that the human species is on, and kind of, there's these, well, we can look at what's happening on with the climate as one thing. We can also look at how we're destabilizing a lot of our financial structures right now, as another thing. It seems like the world is at a interesting way to put it, but at a bit of an edge. Probably not the right exact language, but I think it conveys kind of the notion of what I've picked up from your writing. What is this like? I think you allude to it as a potential time for transformation. Like when you say, well, when I feel into it, there's potentially we can go either left or right. Where left may not be supportive for the outcome of humanity, whereas right is actually we flourish. Can you describe what happens if we sort of don't reinvent ourselves as a species? Where do we actually, like, what are some of your fears that are in there that, and then potentially where can we go with this reinvention and potentially introducing some of these rite of passages and actually following the evolution of consciousness?
Yeah, thanks for the deep, earnest questions. I never know what I'm going to get with a podcast. That's why I kind of like to not ask so much in advance. I'm just kind of curious, like, about what I think, whatever. I mean, yeah, I mean, it's obviously not just what I think. I mean, it's like, a lot of people sharing these deep concerns. I mean, we're basically what we're seeing right now. Where do you live, by the way?
Here in Melbourne, in Australia.
Oh, Australia. Okay, yeah. Well, you've had huge forest fires all over Australia, and obviously the horrible lockdowns. But all over the world, we're seeing massive forest fires, and forest fires obviously release a lot of CO2 into the atmosphere, and the kind of the forests are carbon sinks. So as we lose them, we're not holding as much carbon. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting. There's still a lot of climate deniers in different areas, including kind of the libertarian community and so on. And people just don't even think about it. But it does seem possible. I mean, on the most dire and extreme possibility is that it's already too late and we've already sealed our own doom, and extinction is coming. Physical extinction is coming. Maybe small groups will survive, underground or in domed cities or in the tops of distant mountains or something. But I mean, because we've seen in these past, kind of extinction cycles, that there's a kind of acceleration, feedback loops kind of all work together. And, unfortunately, even though we've had some warm up to know that this was coming, we haven't really been able to change our direction. And if anything, we seem to be still, even now, accelerating in the wrong direction. And, the reason, I mean, the basic reason for that is we all want lives of comfort and joy. And unfortunately, particularly if you live in a cold climate or whatever, a lot of that comes from, fossil fuel based things. I mean, even our agriculture is fossil fuels. I mean, our medicines are fossil fuels. Our smartphones and all the equipment that we're using now. It's so rare minerals, fossil fuels. I mean, everything that has allowed us to reach this contemporary lifestyle has had a destructive impact on the environment. And it seems like we're reaching a point where we have to break out of the cycle of extraction, but it's almost impossible to do that within capitalism, because basically companies, if they're publicly traded, they have a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders to maximize short-term financial gain. So that means they are forced, almost like, robots or something, to kind of ignore environmental externalities, corrupt governments, and so on. So we're sort of locked. At the moment we're sort of locked into this capitalist paradigm, but there's still such a deep, abiding faith in individuality and individual progress, and wealth creation, private wealth creation as being a good thing, that it doesn't feel that we're very close to reckoning with the types of changes that we would have to make on a species level, which is kind of what I tried to outline in How Soon Is Now. So I can't say that I'm extremely optimistic at this point. But on the other hand, sometimes crisis comes and then, everybody has to change, even if they didn't expect to change.
Yeah, so one of the things, thank you so much for sharing that, by the way. One of the things that, yeah, that is then like possible to pick as a thread from your writing for me personally is, and I found this to be quite the thought-provoking conversation, and the fact that you had, yeah, memorialized it in writing, is the fact that, yeah, a lot of this breakdown that we're feeling and seeing and witnessing, could be, I don't want to say will be, but potentially could be synonymous with, some of the discomfort that you described earlier, that we go through if we have individual rites of passages, which potentially a lot of us are not connected to anymore. But witnessing the rite of potentially this is a planetary rite of passage, for us to actually take society to a whole nother level, which actually requires a shift, a paradigm shift, probably, even if I can go that far, at the risk of sounding cliche, for our level of consciousness.
Yeah, I mean, that's really, it seems like you got the idea. I mean, but now we're seeing more people go through, like, efforts towards self-initiation, whether through meditation or through shamanism or yoga or whatever. But it often still gets assimilated back into an individualist and capitalist paradigm, where like Joe Dispenza or something. I mean, it's still, or the Secret, the manifestation. Like, it's still this idea that it's all about our individual success. And I'm not saying that I'm outside of this. Like, I feel very, in a way, alienated. I don't feel part of, like, community the way I'd like to be. I mean, I think a lot about, a professor who was talking about the Australian Aboriginals, and apparently, like, documentary filmmakers wanted to make a film of this Aboriginal group, but they decided to do it in collaboration with them. So they showed them all these different documentaries, and they were like, okay, well, how do you want us to make a film about you? And the Aboriginals said, we don't want there to be any close-ups in the film. We want the whole community to be visible in every shot of the film. So that's the way they made the film. It's a wide angle, shot, and the whole community is there, and then some, talking, whatever. But that's so different. I mean, we're just, we've developed a mindset that's very individualistic, without tremendous crisis and suffering, it's hard to see how we really break out of that.
And that, because that's one of the things you mentioned about rites of passages that I don't think we captured in the podcast, is you transcend your level of ego, and you start looking, instead of this me conversation, it becomes a much more we conversation, having gone through the transition. I think eloquently put, watching some of your talks. I think there was a talk you did at Mind Valley, and it was all about transcending competition for cooperation, which is kind of, I guess I could use that as a segue to ask the question of, you put it so eloquently in that, capitalism may just be a transitional structure, which even just that I found really inspiring to just think about. Yeah, and I know that, I'm not here to throw goop on capitalism. There's a lot of great things it's done for us, but thinking about it as a transitional structure, then sort of giving, us the idea of, okay, it is heavily based on competition. What does a future based on cooperation look like? And I know you've done a lot of talks on the importance of art. Is that potentially why art is so intriguing to you, because it is more of a cooperative force? What does the future look like if we are to transcend competition into cooperation? Is it something that potentially is even that far, like, away from our innate being? Like, are we naturally cooperative anyway? What are you like? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think most of our human, most of the time that humans have existed, we've been, in communities, indigenous, tribal people, and that's actually much more of our natural way. Yeah, so that would, when we're forced into it, we might be able to pick that back up. It might be really built into our sort of subconscious DNA structures or something. But I mean, yeah, I mean, I've been looking at the P2P Foundation. They just published an interesting paper report, kind of looking at community-based, peer production, as a model for the future. So I mean, it's radically different. It would be like it would really be embodying this idea that we're all in it together. There's no other. That but I mean, I could see ways that this could start to happen. In that, we might start to see, where the pandemic is obviously in a crazy place right now, but we don't know what comes next. It may be that, like, traveling around the world at a drop of a hat no longer becomes feasible. It may be that we have to source more of our food locally and grow, if we're in an urban environment, grow like rooftop gardens and be involved actually tangibly, and stuff like that. Figuring out how to make energy at a lesser intensity, but from more renewable sources. I mean, that could, it could unlock a lot of ingenuity in a totally different direction. I mean, it's I'm interested in terms of the blockchain world, this whole idea of the DAOs, the distributed autonomous organizations, and if those could be pointing towards a way that we can develop protocols and tools that make it much more seamless and efficient for people to work together, whether they're with each other or virtually.
I love that. It does seem to have this embedded sense of greater responsibility for the individual in there, which I think is, again, sorry, there is a lot of this conversation pinning on the rite of passages that we've discussed, but also noting that, yeah, there is an element, and I'm just going to kind of go there in this conversation, that if we're transcending from the me to we, there is a lot of people in power that are still me-centric. And that is probably where some of the cracks in society have been already presenting, would you say, and potentially how we're starting to realize that actually we do need to transcend the current structures, if anything, at least just to sort of displace power and bring it back into the hands of the everyday person. But that requires greater responsibility in the hands of the everyday person, would you say?
Oh yeah, I mean, that's it's a whole turning around and reframing. I made a practical effort years ago to create like a sort of network of local community groups, empowering local leaders, and it got to a certain point. Then for various reasons, it kind of collapsed. But I keep thinking about that still, because I mean, I feel like we need to generate people power. I mean, even in the 60s, they talked about, consciousness raising was a basic idea of like movement building. Like you get people together to talk about their shared interests and concerns. And, there've been different little movements that have been trying to do this, whether it was the Occupy movement or Transition Town, which was a very interesting kind of permaculture-based model coming out of England. But they don't seem to scale just because, we're all locked into the system, and we wake up every morning and we're like, shoot, I have to make, $3,000 to pay off my loans and my daughter's school bill and all that stuff. So it's like we're in a system that really keeps us locked down. Yeah, in this, most people are just struggling to keep it going. And it is very interesting if you step back and you think about it, because like when we started developing all this technology, you would have thought at some point it would have been so that people could have to work less. Like back in the 40s, most families, only the husband worked, the wife, that wasn't very feminist or liberated, but one parent would work, and out of that income, they would have enough to take care of a middle-class family. Now you have, both parents working, and in countries like the US, they're still going deeper and deeper into debt on the average.
Barely able to, yeah.
Extraction of capital and potentiality up to the top of the pyramid that somehow hasn't been kind of obvious enough, or that it's created a large enough kind of resistance. Like most people still go along with it. I mean, I think the ideology of private wealth is so powerful that most people think, oh, like I'm not wealthy this year, but next year I'm going to pick the next crypto and I'll get wealthy, or I'll get the lottery ticket, or I'll get the acting role on that soap opera or whatever. So so we all look at the lucky winners and we kind of feel that that's probably going to be us, rather than people coming together and creating shared power. That would be the alternative. Even if it's not quite as glamorous.
Yeah, and I think as you described that, I'm noticing even in myself an uncertainty in terms of what that even potentially looks like. Um, and maybe this is too left field to sort of segue neatly into this conversation, but one of the things I noticed in here in Australia, we're a very fortunate country, touch wood. But even things like the pandemic, like we had the government handing out money to pretty much everybody that was running a business in some form, shape, or manner. And obviously, it's taxpayer generated income, but there was money going back into the hands from the system. Um, and it really, I've often just sat and wondered what a universal basic income would do for a society. Obviously, crime rates is like a low hanging fruit where you can sort of just go, oh, I wonder what would happen to that. But then collectively as well, when you think about creativity, people's autonomy and the things that we actually, a big part of what I do as a purpose coach, start thinking about, what would a world of people just doing what they love doing look like, rather than having to, break, basically hustle to make a dollar to break bread. Um, yeah, it opens up a whole new can of worms for me, but potentially a can of butterflies. um, but yeah, do you like, are these some of the instruments that you think about in terms of, what are some of the, yeah, like what does something like universal basic income mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think more and more, I think that the best option to kind of orchestrate some larger social movement to change the dynamics of the situation would be focused on like the idea of a post-work society and something along the lines of universal basic income. There's a book called Inventing the Future, which posits that, a very interesting book. And Andrew Yang, was a very unlikely presidential candidate who got the
Mm,
idea on the national stage here. And actually, it was amazing how much support he developed very quickly.
mm,
So yeah, I mean, there should be, you call it like a freedom dividend or whatever. Like, I mean, if we have a society that's able to produce enough to satisfy everybody's basic needs, and that dividend should be distributed so that people don't have to live in fear and insecurity. I mean, the problem is that the fear and insecurity feeds the capitalist beast, right?
mm,
Because Jeff Bezos wants to maximize his profit margins, so he wants to pay workers the least and make and take care of them the least. Because that increases his then he's able to buy even a bigger yacht than the $500 million yacht. He can buy a $2 billion yacht or something. So that's yeah, we have like perverse incentives in the system, and the idea of a post-work movement or universal basic income, I think, is very, very radical, because what it would partially do is change the pricing for labor.
mm,
Because at the moment, the jobs that are very difficult, whether it's like working in a hospice or the worst jobs, cleaning toilets or whatever, people get paid terribly for that. But if everybody had a basic income, then those jobs would become much more pricey, is what they should be.
mm, mm.
So,
Yeah. So I can hear that there are challenges in the existing paradigm to incorporate a new paradigm, but then also the new paradigm is reliant upon a lot of innovation and yeah, potentially destabilizes the current power structure, and then obviously the current power structure is in power. So there's that, there's this consistent catch 22.
yeah, but I mean, I
Um,
wonder if there's some. I've often wondered if there's some way to, I feel like if you could figure out a forum. I mean, the thing is that, if the environment collapses on us, which is highly likely at this point, then nobody benefits. I mean, it's not fun for the wealthy people. It's not going to be nice to live on a planet like, their children are going to be like, Dad, what's up? Like 2 billion people just starved, and everybody in
mm,
Africa is dead because it's like, too hot, and they're going to be like, oh, I'm counting my billions. I mean, it's not a nice situation
mhm,
for them either. So, I mean, it would make most sense. And I also feel the basic income is actually necessary to address the ecological crisis, because we actually need, as we've seen with the pandemic, most of the work that people were doing was not very important. I mean, transporting resources, extracting energy, growing food, those things are crucial. But, marketing for like a mid-level, accounting firm, or, digital this and that or whatever, a lot of that stuff is actually not very essential. So, I mean, if people had a basic income, then maybe they could be refocused on all of the stuff that really needed to be done 20 years ago, but just needs to be done even more now. Like you could be, in a city like New York City, if you put aquaponic gardens on every rooftop, that would be like 70% of the food that the city needs. Plus, it would begin to affect the albedo effect if that was happening in cities around the world. Stuff like that. There's insulation. I mean, some of it's, as again, it's not very glamorous. It's like that's part of it. Is it's like it's shift in consciousness that nobody wants to make, from endless growth and perpetual more and more freedom and so on, to be like, okay, actually we can have growth in certain areas, like in terms of our inner consciousness, and the quality of our relationships, and even experimenting with community and experimenting with, different forms of love and connection. Like we could have infinite experimentation, with that. But we actually can't have that anymore in terms of extracting and exploiting resources, because those turns out to be very finite, and we've kind of hit the limit on them, So in those things, I mean, it's like, I mean, I have like, I'm trying to find something in an old computer. I have like 6 old laptops or something like that, because I need to stay on top, and over like 15 years or whatever. What an incredible waste. Like if Apple hadn't been trying to maximize profits, they would have created component-based, laptops. So, something that gets better, you shift it out, but instead our society is based on, conspicuous consumption, planned obsolescence, because that rewards, corporate profit margins. And so it's like, it's a stunning recalibration that we need to have. And, maybe this is the time for it. I mean, it looks like we're heading for more closed down with the pandemic. Maybe this is our opportunity to actually think some stuff through. Oh, I see you have I Am That on your bookshelf. That's like one of my favorite books. I love that book.
Yeah, awesome.
I have some other good ones that I can know.
Thanks for checking them out. I wanted to check in, like, one of the other things that I noticed, and yeah, just sort of going on from some of the remarkable things that happened with the pandemic. Like, I know it is quite an interesting time to have just witnessed what's happened in the last couple of years around the world, but even just noticing, like, as we became local, like, one of the amazing things for me personally was, like, before, like, even burning fossil fuels, like planes was not something that was ever going to stop. Like transport, communication, like it's a mode of transport, it's a mode of people staying connected all over the world. And all of a sudden it was like, no, planes are grounded. It was like, what? And it's like, yeah, planes are grounded. And it's like, shit, that's possible. Like, actually, that's possible. Like, amazing. We can actually, if we get together, create some global level, like mass blanket change, if we're incentivized enough. And this, I think, bleeds into potentially, the current cataclysm, if you will, if you want to go that far to call it that, as being a rite of passage, as a potential initiative change, witnessing what was going on and going, actually, this is pretty remarkable that we can shut major systems down that may potentially no longer serve us. And, not saying that planes are a major contributor to this, but, there is some contribution that they make to greenhouse gases, and they've got dolphins.
Oh, yeah, planes are a massive.
Right. And they've got dolphins and stuff swimming through rivers in, like, central major cities and stuff. Like, the biodiversity, just watching nature sort of reclaim and, like, heal itself. And it didn't require so much of us tending to it for it to heal. Even it was just like, if you can just relax and just stay in your local environment and do, less consumption like you previously were than what you previously were, nature heals itself. And it was remarkable just leaving your home. Like, I remember I was only allowed in Australia, as you alluded to before, we had some really tight lockdowns, and we still kind of do. But you're only allowed 5Ks out of your home for a little while, which was amazing. I saw more people during those lockdown periods in my local environment than I did previously, because before, people were scattered traveling around wherever, but you only had 5Ks to travel. You'd go out and you'd see people happy, like people genuinely happy, just walking to the park, and the parks were filled with people because it was the only little time that they got to interact with each other. So yeah, I don't know, it sort of really helped crystalline in my head the potential of what this global conversation that people have been having for a little while could potentially look like, with some of the benefits that are in there. But like you said, it does mean sacrificing a lot of the things that we've potentially started to take for granted.
Yeah, I mean, totally. I mean, you said it well.
Awesome. Daniel, man, is before I let you go, there's some things that I got to tune into. Firstly, like I can't thank you enough for your writing. I think there's a lot of bold ideas in there consistently, page to page. And one of the big things that happens for me is like I think a lot of us have some really big ideas, and potentially consider some of the things that you've mentioned in terms of holy shit, what if this is the fissure that actually causes the great healing? But to like actually put pen to paper and actually take that and actually follow the rabbit hole all the way through on such thinking, is beyond inspirational. It's actually, it's incredible. So thank you so much for the work you've been doing, and it's not just
It was
overnight. Like,
really nice to hear. Sometimes I feel like nobody gives a hoot.
I highly doubt that. I highly doubt that. Your writing's very well received all over the world, but it's nice to feel the humility at your end. Can I also, before I let you go, though, there's a question that I ask everybody, which is, what does an inspired evolution look like for you? So for yourself, the collective, humanity, and the planet, whichever level, all of them, whatever's going on for you, what does, when you hear the term inspired evolution, hopefully there's some hope in there for tomorrow. What does it mean for you? What do you hear when you hear that phrase?
Not so much. I mean, I'll think about it now. Inspired evolution. I mean, well, I had a company called Evolver, so I mean, I think it's a useful, it's similar. I mean, though, yeah, I guess it's more or less what we're talking about. I mean, I'm just, I feel like there's kind of this, postmodern, spiritual movement, but then there's also kind of like ecological and social justice movements, and I feel that those are sort of what need to come together. And I often feel very disappointed by a lot of the kind of more privileged people I know who are going through their personal development, and gaining a lot from indigenous practices and giving back for sure in certain ways, but it's still, it feels like, I don't know, it may require like a Christ-like, Gandhi-like thing at some point where we really just like put down I mean, it's, what would it be like not to just play at inspired evolution, but actually to, to live it, I mean,
Roll up our sleeves.
yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much for that call to action and the call to arms. Daniel, man, thank you so much for doing this with us here today. Sure. I genuinely really appreciate your time, your energy, your presence. And on behalf of myself, the Inspired Evolution Tribe and audience, wishing you all the best. And the links to your books will be in the show notes for those keen to check it out. How Soon Is Now is like our must read.
My big thing is the Substack newsletter, Daniel Pinchbeck, Substack.
Cool. I'll chuck that in there as well. Thank you so much for mentioning that. And thank you so much on behalf of all of us. Thanks.
Great day.
Hey guys, if you enjoyed this video, give it a like, leave us a comment. And if you want to stay in tune for new episodes launching every Monday, hit subscribe and I'll see you in the next video. Stay inspired to evolve.